Hey there, AP Hug team. This is Sanchez with our next flipped video lecture, which is going to focus on political geography, looking at the morphology of state shapes. Alright, so just a quick recap before we start looking at this flipped lecture, which is on state shapes. Want to backtrack a bit and remind you that in our political geography unit, we're looking through the lens of course, what makes a state unique, how do we factor in self-determination, and looking at individual state sovereignty, which you're doing for your UN projects. And in our last flip lecture, we looked at the discussion of boundaries, whether it be physical boundaries, looking at mountains, looking at rivers, or if we're looking at geometric boundaries, maybe more focused on latitude, longitude, and we also have cultural boundaries. So for this particular flip lecture, we're going to focus on what is called state or territorial morphology. And that's just kind of a fancy term that describes the shapes, sizes, and relative location of states. So as political geographers, all these characteristics help determine the opportunities available to and the challenges faced by a country, both collectively and its citizens individually. So part of the UN project, I wanted you to consider possible arguments of how perhaps the state morphology or the shape of your potential nation becoming a state might impact the UN decision. So in this particular flip lecture, we're going to look at a couple things. On the screen, we look at shape, we look at size, we look at location, and political situation. So this can have a tremendous impact on the relationship in a state. We're going to see through the different examples that especially shape and size can have an impact in terms of how cohesive or together a state or its citizens or its population is. In Chapter 8, we were looking at something called centripetal and centrifugal forces. Remember the centrifugal forces with the F, think about fighting or forcing apart, versus centripetal forces could be peace and bringing together. So in some situations, if states are really large or they're spread out, that could be something that divides them. And then in the same token, if we have a compact state or kind of close relatively size, people can feel more connected. Now as far as location, geographic location can also have a tremendous impact on the people. Of course that goes along with the history and the culture. The shape can help us understand the relationship, perhaps of the state or with the relationship with the different states around it, and political situation, how it would interact or what types of agreements or conflicts it might have with potential neighbors. So for a College Board, they want you to be familiar with 5 main identifications of shapes of states. So the first one is compact states, perforated states, elongated states, fragmented states, and perforated states. So in your geolog book, you should be able to not only, of course, identify these 5, take a few notes, but also, again, perhaps give some examples, and maybe even go online or check in your textbook to write down additional examples so you can be very familiar in terms of what these shapes actually look like in practice. Alright, so the first one we're going to take a look at is something called fragmented states, which you can kind of see on the screen. We're talking about, most part, a state that's separated from each other. So for example, Indonesia has several different islands. There's several discontinuous pieces of the territory. So a good rule of thumb, any state that is composed of islands, for example, would be a fragmented state. And this could be a problem if some of the islands are remote or kind of off in the distance like in Indonesia. Although a majority of the population lives on 1 or 2 of the islands, like in Indonesia's case, we see in Java and Sumatra, those on remote islands might be difficult to control. We might see that might be difficult to defend. If we're looking just at Indonesia, for example, the island of East Timor received its independence from Indonesia after resisting an invasion by the Indonesian army. So that's just, again, a little example of Indonesia. A different kind of fragmentation occurs if a piece of the territory is separated by another state. This also occurs in eastern India, The country of Bangladesh separates the state of West Bengal from the rest of India. So fragmented states, for the most part, we're talking about, again, that kind of separation factor. Second type of state morphology we could look at is something called elongated states. So a good kind of picture for your mental map, we look at Chile, for example. For elongated states, the states have a long and narrow shape, and sometimes because of physical geography, and other times just for political and economic reasons. So in the case of Chile, it's located on the long, narrow strip of the coastline between the Pacific Ocean and the Andes Mountains. So some challenges for elongated states, if you're talking about the north and south, it was such far divide, it could be a question of something that could divide the state. Maybe the north feels distant or cut off politically, or maybe economic or culturally from the south. Some challenges could include the fact that government has to provide infrastructure for such a long piece of territory. We've seen elongated states, for example, in Chile's case, notice how they put the capital, which is Santiago, kind of in the middle as a way to kind of unify and kind of bring the sense of unity in such a stretched out piece of territory. We could even maybe connect to the United States, where you think about the 13 colonies. Our own capital, Washington, D.C. on the East Coast, is also kind of the center portion to kind of bring unity from those kind of original 13 colonies. So elongated states, long, narrow, stretched out, kind of long and skinny, and can cause various problems for different states. All right, our third type of state would be something known as compact states, and that one's kind of easily, again, to identify. It's round, and some of the benefits come in the fact that if it's round, or I could even add maybe, it could also be kind of square, kind of boxy shaped. But you can kind of take a guess that a benefit of a compact state is very easy to defense, pretty easy, relatively, communication around all areas. The distance from any point in the country is the center, so it's about the same. And in most cases, we see compact states are supposed to provide geographic stability. Compactness also promotes good communications, and all right, the next example are the Perforated States. Otherwise, for the most part, is a compact state with usually a large or projecting extension that is kind of perrupted or kind of sticking out. Often, a lot of times, these perruptions exist in order to reach natural resources. So if the state's trying to get access to maybe a river or ocean, and occasionally they'll actually cut into another country or two to try to do that. For example, the Democratic Republic of Congo, which split a small fragment called Kamina from Angola to the main country. So it can create room for many factions or problems geographically. Another example I have the screen right now is Thailand. So again, the piece kind of jumps out from the main body. It's kind of disconnected, which again could be something that divides the country, could be more difficult to defend. So Perforated states is another type of our state shapes we could define or identify. All right, and then the last one is what is called perforated states. And this is a state that completely surrounds another one we could classify as a perforated state. The best example on the screen right now is South Africa, where the apartheid, which we talked about in Chapter 7, the segregation of government, separated primarily the black Leslo from the rest of the country, leaving it completely surrounded by South Africa. Now, part of our discussion of perforated states, we can also look at introducing what are exclaves versus enclaves. So exclaves, we're talking about separated from a state by another state, versus enclaves, where again we're looking at the example of South Africa. So just again some more vocabulary to make sure it's a little more precise. And then I also want to throw in there, of course, that one of the things that we see, especially with the last example, perforated states, we also can classify, or something to go into state morphology, is the discussion whether or not it's called landlocked. So this could be, again, there's no access to water, which can make a huge impact in terms of they're trying to have trade or commerce or infrastructure because they lack those ports. So in some of your cases where you're studying for your UN, there could be an argument or maybe a counter argument is the fact of we can't necessarily turn this nation or this territory into a complete independent state because the question of, how are they going to deal with the fact that they're landlocked? All right, so let's go ahead and do a little review for your visual learners. And like I said, this might be good to kind of maybe sketch out in your geolog book or maybe even consider for your vocab matrix just so you can kind of visually begin to recognize the different state shapes. Here we go. All right, number 1 on the screen, which is Gambia. Give you a minute. And the correct answer is elongated is the correct answer. All right, here's another one to take a look at. So analyze the state shape and see if you can classify for, again, our elongated, perrupted, compact, fragmented, or perforated state. And the correct answer would be perforated. All right, got another one on the screen, which is Italia, Italy, the country shaped like a boot. Hopefully you'll remember. But if we're going to classify its morphology, the correct answer would be, wait for it, elongated state. All right, looking at the country of Russia, thinking about our different classifications. Give you minutes, and the correct answer would be fragmented state. All right, folks, we'll practice more of the shapes of states in class, and definitely expect that these shapes will be featured on a quiz coming up this week. All right, I'll see you guys in class.